Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Mabel Wilson, and I serve as the director of the Institute for Research in African American Studies, and I'm a professor in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies here at Columbia. I am speaking this evening on the traditional land and unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape. I pay respect to their diaspora, and I also honor the past, present, and future presence of the Lenape on their homeland. For the past 28 years, IRAAS, founded by the late Professor Manning Marable, has been a fierce advocate of social responsibility in Black studies. The Institute serves as an academic resource center for a local and global community that has cultivated an intellectual tradition grounded in Harlem and New York City's rich history and culture. Now, in partnership with the new Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies, what we call AAADS, IRAAS continues to expand the array of contemporary scholarship and interpretation of the diasporic Black experience with ongoing series like Conversations. So I want to welcome you all to tonight's Conversations. Listen, but don't ask question, Hawaiian Slack Key Guitar Across the Pacific by Dr. Kevin Fellezs in conversation with Dr. Deborah Wong. So it's a really wonderful pleasure to introduce my colleague, Kevin Fellezs, who is an associate professor of music and African American and African Diaspora Studies here at Columbia University. His first book, Birds of Fire, Jazz, Rock, Funk, and the Creation of Fusion, which was published by Duke University Press in 2011, is a study of fusion, jazz, rock, funk, music of the 1970s. Birds of Fire received in 2012 the Woody Guthrie Book Award. Dr. Fellezs has published articles on music from jazz to heavy metal to enka. In Jazz Perspectives, the Journal of Popular Music Study, and the Journal of the Society for American Music, as well as being published in numerous anthologies. We are delighted that tonight he's going to share with us insights on his most recent book, Listen But Don't Ask Question, also published by Duke University Press. Listen But Don't Ask Question is a transnational study of the ways in which Hawaiian belonging is articulated by Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian guitarists in Hawaii, California, and Japan. But I think most importantly, and particularly for those who are thinking about Black studies, about diaspora, about cultural identity, more importantly, Listen But Don't Ask Questions crafts a study of how cultural performances complicate conceptions of indigeneity and diaspora amidst histories of dispossession and migration. Joining Kevin this evening is Dr. Deborah Wong, who is an ethnomusicologist and professor of music at the University of California, Riverside. She specializes in the musics of Asian America and Thailand and has written 3 books: Louder and Faster, Pain, Joy, and the Body Politic in Asian American Taiko, 2019, with University of California Press. Speak It Louder, Asian Americans Making Music and Sounding the Center, History and Aesthetics in the Thai Buddhist Ritual. She has served as the editor for Nobuko Miyamoto's memoir, Not Yo Butterfly, My Long Song of Relocation, Race, Love, and Revolution of 2021. Counted among her many activities and projects, she also serves as a curator for the new Asian Pacific American series for Smithsonian Folkways. Very active in the public sector at the national, state, and local levels, she recently joined the board of the Chinese American Museum in Washington, D.C. So we'll begin this evening with a short presentation by Kevin, followed by a dialogue with Deborah. We'll open the Q&A toward the end of this event, so please write your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom on the bottom right of your Zoom window. So I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Kevin, please.
Hello. Thank you, Mabel, for that wonderful introduction. Before I start, I want to also acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded and occupied homeland of the Munsee Lenape. I want to thank the Institute for Research in African American Studies and its director, Mabel Wilson, for giving me the opportunity tonight to talk about my book with Deborah Wong. I also want to thank behind the scenes Sharon Harris, who always makes the magic happen behind everything. So I just want to thank her as well. I am so thankful to Deborah Wong for her generous time spent with me this evening, as well as throughout my career. And in fact, she's been a mentor in many ways for me, particularly in my early career. And I want to thank her publicly for that. And I also wanted to say what an influence she has been on my own thinking on race and music. You'll find her cited all over my work, from my earliest publications to this book. So I'm so deeply honored and pleased to have her as my conversationalist this evening. So thank you again. So to begin with, I guess, my remarks proper, I'd like to, in his own voice, to give you what inspired the title to my talk, to my book, as well as the epigraph for the book. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will all work. So we're going to be hearing in Gabi Pahinui's own voice, the inspiration for my epigraph and title. He was a preeminent Hawaiian musician and helped lead the renaissance of Hawaiian culture, and in particular, in terms of my book in this evening, a leading light in revitalizing Hawaiian slack key guitar in the 1970s. And so here is a short video clip of what inspired me to title the book.
Well, what would you say, Gabby, to the youngsters? I mean, you're such a folk hero here in Hawaii, and as famous a name in Hawaiian music for anyone that's interested. I'm talking about genuine Hawaiian music now. Where do they get started? Where do they go? And what's your advice to them?
I would think first how I started. Listen, but don't ask questions. What's what favorite person that you think that you like his style of playing? Don't ask so many questions. And you just watch or you hear and you go home and practice. That's the only way. Never ask questions. And you have to have that in you. That's the only way that's the way I learned it.
Okay, one final thing before I begin my remarks proper. For those of you, especially those of you who are unfamiliar with this music, I'd like to put this sound of this music in your ear. So we'll be listening to Gabby Pahinui's version of a slack key standard named Hi'ilave. And Hi'ilave is about, on the sort of surface textual level, is about the twin falls that you see in the upper right-hand corner there on the big island of Hawaii. These twin waterfalls, Hi'ilave. And the song is about them, as I say, sort of at the textual level. But the kauna, or hidden meaning, or coded meaning, is the song is about two lovers. And so, and that is a practice that is quite prevalent in Hawaiian music. But I really want you to hear, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this music, to listen to this music and to kind of think about what is it that sort of connotes Hawaiianness to you, right? Beyond the Hawaiian language that will be sung. Right? I can talk about the musical form for people in the Q&A if they want, but really I just want to get the sound of this music in your heads.
He loving, take one. Kumakakai kena o hi'ilave, papalohi nei o nā kele. Kumatatai kena o hi'ilave, papalohi nei o nā kele. Ole noa eloa ana, iwahi au no ke kuahiri. Ole noa eloa ana, iwahi au no te tuahiri. Kele mai au I ka nui manu hauala au nei puni wai o. Kele mai au I ka nui manu hauala au nei puni wai o. Ke Allah ia mai, noi ka wahilele o Hi'ilave. Hiva hiva hoe nā ka makua, ahilehi ahina ke kupuna. Ke alahala ia mai, noho I ka wahilele o Hi'ilave. Hiva hiva hoe nā ka makua, ahelehi a'ina ke kupuna.
I am sitting in my mother's kitchen in San Francisco, California, with my mother and Auntie Esther, a Japanese woman, born and raised in Hawaii, who is not actually the sibling of either of my parents. We have no blood shared between us. She is, as Hawaiians say, my calabash auntie, someone who is a close friend of my father and mother, and who has always been treated as a family member. In many ways, she has been closer to me than many of my real, that is, biological gene-sharing aunts, an active interlocutor in the extended family of calabash aunts and uncles my sister and I share. People who, by most accounts, are not blood relatives, but whose relations can only be described as familial. My mother and Auntie Esther are busy making supper. Between sneaking bites from the emerging meal, I joined them in a discussion about comfort food, those dishes that signify safety, roots, love, and belonging. Auntie Esther volunteers that one of her favorite dishes is poi, the kalo or taro custard that is a staple of the traditional Hawaiian diet. When I cry out, "Yuck, I hate that stuff," she turns to me with mock anger, shouting back, "What, you don't like poi? I'm more Hawaiian than you." This culinary vignette encapsulates the essential predicaments that I explore in this book. As Hawaiian hip-hop group Sudden Rush once asked, what is a true Hawaiian? How might someone claim Hawaiian identity? How might performing kiualu, or Hawaiian slack guitar, demonstrate being Hawaiian, especially since to play the music correctly, a guitarist must convey the feeling of aloha aina, or love of the land, and embody the right feeling of being Hawaiian inside, as slack guitarists put it. Kiualu, or slack key, is a finger-picking, open-tuning, acoustic steel string guitar folk music tradition that emerged from the Paniolo culture of Hawaii in the mid-19th century. Paniolo is the Hawaiian language term derived from the Spanish word español to denote Hawaiian cowboy, signaling the significant role Mexican vaqueros played in the formation of Hawaiian ranch culture. Two fundamental non-Hawaiian elements, the instrument and the ranching culture from which kiualu emerged, indicate the already mixed nature of the Hawaiian slack key guitar tradition. How do guitarists become almost Hawaiian inside, as many non-Hawaiian guitarists put it, when performing Hawaiian slack key guitar? How, in other words, do slack key guitarists articulate Hawaiian belonging? What constitutes Hawaiian belonging, particularly as Hawaiian music has served as an effective cultural link between Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian, identification and political aspirations, despite its long history of commodification? Because this project considers kiualu guitarists in California and Japan, in addition to Hawaii, another series of questions unfolds. How do diasporic Hawaiians fit in any discussion of indigeneity in cultural performance? How might Japanese guitarists reproduce or challenge the long history of cultural appropriation, commodification, and non-Hawaiian indigenization accomplished through Hawaiian at heart rhetoric, or the celebrated open-ended inclusivity allowed by the aloha spirit? The overarching theoretical conceit I use in this text is to mobilize four Hawaiian terms, namely kuleana, prerogative and responsibility, aloha, love, ohana, extended family, and pono, or holistic balance. These Olelo Hawaii, or Hawaiian language keywords, help us think through the ways variously positioned Hawaiian slacky guitarists articulate Kanaka Maoli notions of belonging through a discourse and practice of Hawaiian musical values and aesthetics. One of the foundational principles of traditional Hawaiian musical pedagogy is pa'akawaha, or shut your mouth. The lead epigraph for this book, in which Gabby Pahinui answers a question regarding the first thing a student of Hawaiian music should learn, makes it plain. The first rule is, don't ask questions. Two other guiding principles serve as important corollaries to pa'akawaha. Ho'olohe ke pepe'au, or hear with your ears, and nanakamaka hanakalima, or what the eyes see, let the hands do, which requires the student to apply what they have heard and seen into music. Moreover, there is a strict hierarchy and set of protocols. I'm interested in mobilizing Olelo Hawaii terms as decolonizing exercises in order to bring the insights gained on the periphery back to the center, to raise havoc with our settled ways of thinking and conceptualization. This use of Olelo Hawaii terms disturbs our settled ways of thinking about Kanaka Maoli and their musicking by provincializing the intellectual and ideological bedrock undergirding them. By engaging Olelo Hawaii keywords to frame my analysis of contemporary Kioalu practices, I mean to highlight variously positioned guitarists in attempting to redraw the Trans-Pacific as a space producing what Beverly Diamond, Katie Shego, and Heather Sparling describe as indigenous modernities. They assert that, quote, reclamation, recontextualization, and expansions of traditional concepts to include new realms of experience are important elements of indigenous modernity, end quote. As mentioned, Hawaiian hip-hop group Sudden Rush once asked, who was a true Hawaiian in a Namele Paleleo or Hawaiian rap song, an idiom clearly indebted to African-American and Caribbean expressive culture, implicitly registering cultural hybridity and transcultural connection as a component of true Hawaiianness. But before celebrating the already mixed quality of Hawaiian music culture too quickly, as with claims to sacred lands or the bones of buried ancestors, cultural expression such as Kioalu is entrusted to successive generations and entails kuleana, or responsibility, to nurture, to preserve, as well as extend the epistemological and political grounds for collective senses of Kanaka Maoli identity, and for generating vigorous responses to abridgments and attenuations of assigned, assumed, and claimed identities, both collective and individual, social and private. In a word, clearing the space for the identity claims of the polycultural, while paying heed to the material and ideological conditions that shape that space, those claims. A consideration of Pono may provide a way of thinking through this predicament of guitarists caught between notions of authenticity and appropriation, legitimacy and mimicry, and innovation and idiosyncrasy. If Slacky guitar is to retain its Hawaiianness, it will be through the observation of Pono, rather than fidelity to a set of musical criteria. As I show throughout the book, guitarists often present musical criteria for defining Kioalu, but readily offer extra musical accounts for determining the Hawaiianness of the tradition and for evaluating a musician's performance. Adhering to protocol, offering a genuine expression of aloha aina, and committing to Hawaiian concepts such as kuleana, aloha, and ohana are the ways in which Kanaka Maoli guitarists, in the end, validate guitar's place within Hawaiian slack key guitar. Does the guitarist know the mo'olelo or history of the repertoire they are performing? Can the guitarist convey the right feeling of Hawaii? Kioalu, then, is not merely a music industry-defined genre, which can be readily appropriated by non-members of a given cultural group. Nor is it a static tradition in which outside influences go unrecognized. Kioalu is a vital sounding out of Kanaka Maoli belonging that recognizes its own mix-up history and is not afraid of engaging with the rest of the world. But it is an engagement that articulates the continuing struggle to negotiate those connections on Kanaka Maoli terms and guided by Kanaka Maoli sets of principles and aspirations. The point, after all, is not to simply shut your mouth. The point is to listen. Mahalo. Thank you.
Is this where I'm supposed to appear like that? Well, here I am. And Kevin, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. Yeah. You just reminded me of how much I enjoy listening to authors read their own work. And I mean that both for, you know, fiction and nonfiction and scholarly stuff. It was such a pleasure to hear you read from your own book. And yeah, you know, a nice voice for one thing, but for another thing, I mean, this book is so beautifully written. You write so beautifully. And I just like, I know your book really well at this point, and I really liked the way you managed to read from the beginning and the middle and the end. The way you just kind of seamlessly put together what you shared was quite something. But I'll tell the rest of the folks who are behind the webinar curtain, right? That that Kevin just chose passages from all over the book, and you know, it came off as a seamless whole, right? So all of this should encourage all of you to read the book. Yeah. Hey, Kevin, I don't know if you had a chance to look at who's present, you know, who the attendees are, but a bunch.
Oh, Rick.
Well, yeah, we saw Rick. Thank you, Rick, for your message. Yeah. And I'm, you know, also going to say hello. There's a bunch of people who are here who you cite in your book, Kevin, you know, so one could say that the conversation just keeps going, right?
Sure.
You know, hello to Keola Donahue, who's also out there, Noriko Manabe, Henry Spiller, Meiko Santaella, Masumi Izumi. I think I saw her name out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So all these folks appear in your book at various points. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Oh gosh, Kevin, your book is so important. I mean, and my purpose here is to literally have a conversation with you, as much as I'm dying to tell you what I think is important about the book. That's not really the point here. And I shared some of my questions with you ahead of time, and I'm just going to sort of you know, jump in. Because one of the things that's going on in your, you know, virtuosic book is that your research was like incredibly multi-sited. I mean, you know, one could say it's Hawaii and it's California and it's Japan, and you did, like, you know, deep research in all of those places. And of course, multi-sited research is something that, you know, a lot of us, you know, have been trying to do for a long time. But one of the things I really loved was that you made it absolutely clear that it's not just about triangulating, you know, sites, right? You make it clear throughout that your orientation is absolutely towards Kanaka Maoli self-determination. That's your bottom line, right?
Yeah.
You know, yeah. So I mean, was that, did you know that from the beginning, or I'm curious how you sort of formulated, you know, multiple research sites into something that was still directed towards indigenous sovereignty, really. Tell us more about that.
Yes, that actually took a long journey itself to get to the point where I was actually going to write the way I wrote. One part of it too was I knew I had to talk about my family, and I wasn't really super, I wasn't really willing to do that at first. I really didn't want to talk about family at all. And so that was one of the hoops I went through. But in terms of the sites, it actually started in California, talking to Patrick Landeza, the California guitarist I sort of highlight in that chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I are both diasporic Hawaiians, right? And we were both talking about, you know, where are we in sort of the discourse around Hawaiian indigeneity, which is so often, you know, indigeneity is so often tied to land, right? Importantly, but, you know, as diasporic members of it, we don't have that same connection, right, to the land. And so we were sort of talking through that. And he, at the time, he had just been starting his slacky guitar career. And so he was, you know, getting some pushback from various people. And so he was sort of, you know, we were both sort of thinking through our positionality as diasporic Hawaiians. And so I said, well, I'm going to start. I wrote a senior thesis on him, basically, and it kind of I did some minor research in Hawaiian slacky guitar. But I was just sort of, because it started out as that senior thesis, but it was sort of a way of avoiding talking about jazz anymore. I was sort of getting tired of talking about jazz already as an undergrad. But in any case, that's what started me thinking about what is this Hawaiian music besides just being a source of pleasure for me and my family and things. What else was it doing? And talking with Patrick really started me having me think like, oh, this is really doing some kind of work around identity, belonging, politics, etc. And then I thought, well, obviously I'm going to have to talk to people in Hawaii, right? And fortunately, I have some family connections, and I started just talking loosely. And at first, actually, a lot of Hawaiian guitarists really were either reticent for a variety of reasons, and or two were kind of, and this is sort of typical in many ways, just kind of like, well, who's going to be interested in this? Nobody's really interested in this music. Why, why are you bothering? Kind of, sort of. So there's a kind of resistance in some ways from them at first too. But once a lot of the guitarists initially thought too, I was going to write a method book. And I was like, no, I'm not going to steal your thunder, man. I'm not going to write a method book. I'm not even a guitarist of any note. So, so I was talking with them. And at one point, Dennis Kamakahi, who's unfortunately passed on to the ancestors, I was talking with him and he mentioned, he's like, oh, have you been to Japan? And I was like, well, no, not like as an adult, no. And he's like, well, you should go to Japan. There's a Japanese guy over there that if you meet him, he's great. He came over here and studied in the 70s, and he's the real deal. You should talk to him. If you really want to get a sense of the way it's traveling, it's not just traveling to the West Coast of the US. Like Japan is this huge Hawaiian scene. You should check it out. So I was like, okay. And it took me a long time to meet Yamauchi. In fact, I tried unsuccessfully for a number of years, a couple of years before I actually even contacted a student of his, who then set up a meeting. And I even went over to Japan the first time to do the research on this, about 12 years ago, not even knowing I was going to meet anybody. I just went on the word of the student who said, well, maybe you can meet my teacher. He's kind of busy, but maybe, I can set something up. And so I was like, okay. So I just went over there thinking, okay, hopefully at least, maybe I'll meet him at least, and he can talk to me about his experience, right? And I can get some kind of thing about Japanese slack key and, what it's doing over there and everything. But he was true to his word. He took me to a restaurant. I meet Yamauchi and a number of his students. It's clear he's, the center of the scene, almost immediately. And once he had heard that Dennis Kamakahi told me about him and everything, it took a while too with him to really sort of, become comfortable to talk about things with me. Because he was very sensitive and aware of the politics of Hawaiian music, right? And so he was really very aware, especially initially when we met, that he goes, what is your angle? What are you trying to, is this going to be another story of Japanese appropriation, right? I mean, he didn't put it that way at all, all right? But there was that sort of long time. So, and that's just on the ethnographic front, right? So I wanted to get the history and the context, and actually there's like everybody, you overwrite. And I remember the first draft I sent to my editor, and Ken, he's like, okay, you need to cut like 80,000 words. Just, this is
Ouch.
Yeah, because I had all this work on Japan and things in Japan, a lot of things in Hawaii itself, a lot of things, actually more things in California. And so I was like, I had to sort of chop it down. And in the process of chopping it down, actually made me realize that really what I was thinking about was Hawaiian belonging.
Uh-huh.
And that in its relationship to Hawaiian sovereignty. Right, and what were the notions that were circulating around belonging that also fed into certain ideas in Hawaiian sovereignty and how they were kind of going back and forth. And also because, you know, its revivals at a period in the 1970s when Hawaiian sovereignty movement gives a certain kind of grounding to Hawaiian culture in general, right, at that time period, that is seen as this is not just cultural revitalization. This is also a movement, right, to get the Aina back, right, to restore Hawaiian sovereignty. Right? And so it's not just, oh yeah, I want to play this cool music that my grandparents used to know, right?
Exactly. Your book is all about the music, but it's about so much more than the music, because the music is about so much more than the music. This is what I learned from your book. Yeah, among other things. And I think I also just learned that there's 80,000 words floating around out there that hopefully became other, I don't know, journal articles, chapters. I hope they went somewhere.
No, not really. They're just in the deleted file. Yeah.
Oh no. Oh my God, but it does speak to, you know, the depth and the breadth of the research that went into this book, right? And may I ask, how long would you say did you work on this project? At least 12 years, I think you just said.
Yes, so it came out in 2019, right? I effectively stopped writing at least, what was it, a year or two before that?
Oh.
So when I started around, well, I started talking to Patrick Landez in the late 90s. Right? And that's when I did my senior thesis on him.
Okay, as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been a long, you know, kind of, you know, the kind of slow research that we don't see as much of anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, the neoliberal university pushes us to, you know, research, publish, get it out there, you know, but this to me really sounds and reads like the best of what slow research can be. Yeah, I'm already realizing that the time's going to go by quick here, and I'm wishing that you and I could just go sit down and have coffee somewhere. But I did want to have a chance to ask you a bit more about, you know, your research methods and about writing, you know, as a practice for you. Let's maybe start with ethnography, which is not the only way that you do your research. Right? I mean, there's a lot of deep historical work in your book. I was constantly just sort of, you know, kind of in awe of that. You know, first you'd be sitting in your mother's kitchen, and then suddenly, you know, you take us back to 1819 or whatever. You know, and so I mean, there's a lot of really careful historical research in this book. But ethnography is also very, can I say, central to how you did your research? I don't know. There's a multitude of methods that you drew upon, but ethnography is certainly one of them. First of all, you just sort of very humbly said that, you know, as a guitar player, you're not whatever. Do you play slack key? Do you play?
Not really. You know, I play the ukulele far better than I can play a guitar. Okay. You know, a bad punk guitarist at best. I can bash out power chords, right? But not really.
All right, so you just deflected again, but apparently you play some, but it wasn't like a central research method for you, evidently. No. You know, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, I never did the thing of asking them for lessons, right? Which is right. That's kind of a, I don't know, typical, but it's a conventional ethnographic move, right? Is to become the student of, right? And then you're really in, but I know that's not, mine was much more just talk story sessions.
Okay, hanging out with people, talking with people, interviewing people.
Yeah. The formal interviews, actually, most of that didn't actually end up in the book, right? Most of this stuff that's in the book is all very informal. We're just hanging out, you know, drinking beers or whatever, or at the gig, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But ethnography, yes, was central, partly because I didn't want to do a history of slack key, right? There isn't much to do if that was all I was going to do. And two, I think people, they're essential to scholarship. I don't know really how a better way to say that, but I think it's the people that, I mean, it's the music, of course, that right at first attracts us, but it's the people that keep us, and it's the way the music connects us. And that was the other thing that really started coming through, was how much this music played as a sort of connective tissue between Hawaiians and Japanese among Japanese, and Hawaiians among Hawaiians, and Hawaiians among diasporic Hawaiians, and that the music served a real way of connecting. And so, yeah, the people part of this project was really important. And, you know, as ethnomusicologists, you know, we all form these relationships, right, with our interlocutors. I don't even like those terms, right?
You wrote that in the book, yeah.
But you know, some become friends, but some don't ever become close friends or anything. So there's this kind of relationships that you cultivate, but definitely for me it became more and more clear to me that I had to include all these guitars, as many as I could, and as productively as I could, and talk about all the stuff that, you know, never gets into books. I'm, again, like other ethnomusicologists, right? There's a lot of stuff, a lot of stories that go on about things that are fun to know and things, but they're not really, one, they're maybe not productive intellectually, but two, right, they sort of betray, right, that relationship.
I see. Okay. I can only imagine how many decisions you had to make, because this book is profoundly person-centered, people-centered. Yeah, you know, you keep coming back to individuals over and over again in the book, you know, again, and really, you know, it seems like effortless on your part, but I'm sure it took a lot of effort to make those voices central to your effort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I was writing, I spent part of the writing time in Japan because it was just a nice way to isolate myself. And the wall in the apartment, it drove my wife crazy because I had stick-up notes with all the kind of themes and words and things, and I kept shifting them around. It kind of looked like one of those CSI boards.
Yeah. Where's the
connections and everything. Yeah. And that was the only way I could keep it straight. So after a while, yeah, I just had this huge wall. It was basically one wall. And I would just move the stickers around as I thought, maybe this should go here. Maybe this voice should come in here.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Okay, so I want to ask you a few more things about the writing process, you know, because for anyone writing a big work, you know, whether it's a thesis or a book, you know, it's hard, right? And I was really struck by, I mean, this is not your first book, you know, you know how to write a book. But I'm guessing that probably the process for this was maybe different from your first monograph. And I'm definitely interested in hearing more about how you chose to structure the book, because it's not as if there's the Japan chapter and the California chapter, right? You know, no, the book is structured around these four key, you know, social aesthetic concepts, right? You know, so talk to us about writing.
Yes, so, well, that decision took a while to get to. So at first I did the standard thing that you just hinted at. I was gonna do a Japan sort of section, a California section, Hawaii section initially. And then as I started writing, I started with the Hawaii section. And as I was writing, I kept having to leap out to the other areas. And I kept saying, well, this isn't being contained correctly. I'm not doing anything productive. It's not kind of doing what I want it to do if I structure it this way. And so, and I also began to read very, I don't know, it seemed too straightforward in the way that I was writing those sections.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't include the sort of interconnectivity that I was really interested in, right? And so that pressed me like, okay, I need some other kind of structure, you know, structuring device even, right? To get all of the stories that I wanted to tell and all of the kind of complications that Hawaii presents to you when you think about belonging.
Right.
Because of all of their, right, the different levels that I kind of tried to track out a bit. And so, yeah, it took me a long time before I finally said, wait a minute, this is about Hawaiian Slacky guitar. I'm interested in, you know, sort of a decolonial perspective. I should use the Hawaiian. So like, okay, so how can I do this? And, you know, and I hit on like, wait a minute, everyone else is doing keywords. I think I'm going to do, but I'm not going to use the ones. At first, I was actually going to use some, you know, just, you know, theoretical keywords that are around, right? The transcultural or what have you, different things like that. And then I decided, no, wait a minute, I want the Hawaiians and Hawaii to be central and stay central to this. And as then once I figured out, no, the analytic I'm going to read through is these Hawaiian keywords and the kind of histories that are attached to those keywords, the way they've been shaped and reshaped by various interested parties. That's actually the way I want to think through the interconnectivity and things. So it took me a while. And then, even then, it was like, okay, so which connections do I really want to, right? And that became another few months of thinking through. Yeah.
I can only imagine. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, this book, it is so decolonial in any number of different ways. I mean, right down to the level of not italicizing Hawaiian vocabulary. As you just explained to us, the structure of the book around key Hawaiian concepts, Kanaka Maoli concepts. Yeah. And I really felt in reading it this time, it's actually the second time I read the book, and sometime I'll tell you why, but and reading it this time in hardcover, so that I was really conscious of sort of the, you know, the material structure of the book. It really arrived for me, and in that final chapter where you drill down on pono as a concept, as a value, as a political imperative, right? And in fact, you take us into it by way of this related concept, right? Of the ho'oponopono. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, I surely am. Could you walk us into that? Because I just found it incredibly powerful and effective as a decolonial practice that you enacted in the book.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about which keywords, right, which ones, and I think at one point I kind of list a whole bunch of words I could have kind of thought through. But in the end, as I was, and also in the shaping of which keyword should I start with and which should I end with, as well, once I got the keyword settled, I knew pono and that sort of sense of balance was going to be the way I was going to end the book, because I wanted to rest on a more hopeful and a more, more hopeful note. And even though, in that chapter, I spent a lot of time talking about actually a couple of controversial things in terms of Hawaiian Slacky. One is the Grammy Award, and that was, its own its own mess in many ways, but the music industry, not the musicians. And then the sort of idea that, just like hula, there's probably more non-Hawaiian guitarists at this point that perform Hawaiian Slacky guitar in some level, right? Maybe not professional, but there's guitarists all over the place now that are performing something they call Hawaiian Slacky guitar anyway, right? And so I wanted to sort of grapple with the impact of the music industry on this folk tradition that is still not the most popular kind of music in Hawaii, and this idea that if even with people like Caleb Beamer saying that there will always be a core of Hawaiianness to this music, that maybe not, I don't know, but there's more non-Hawaiian guitars, and what does that mean, right? Well, how does that reshape things. And then I wanted to bring it back to the idea of this Hawaiian inclusivity, right? That Hawaiians have never had, or they've, well, have a more inclusive sense, right, of belonging, right? They do have, right, the outcasts that I mentioned, right, which actually isn't really widely talked about that much, but there was that class at one time, right? So yeah, so I wanted to leave the reader with this sort of hopeful that it's really not about, you know, blood quantum. It's not about those kind of rigid, essentialized, right, identitarian kind of politics. It's about something else. It's about belonging on another level, and it's political, but it's also, if you rethink about those keywords again, it's also an orientation to other people that that this music and this, you know, and the sense of Hawaiianness that it's bubbles up, at least for the guitarists, that, you know, when they're the best kind of playing, is that sense that yes, you know, in a sense, you can be with us, right? We can all be, I don't know, in a sense Hawaiian, but we can all be, right, together. And so I wanted to end with, instead of like, okay, marking off again this place of indigenous exclusivity, I guess, right? And to sort of say, oh, there's a kind of indigenous perspective that is really invested in inclusivity and right, in moving beyond thinking, right, beyond the, and I mean, that's why I also kind of tease out the transpacific, thinking beyond the islands.
Yeah.
Right?
Beyond that.
And to think of the Pacific as connective tissue, right? Water is to connective tissue rather than separate.
Oh, absolutely. You do all of that. And I'm in the awkward position of like, it's going to sound like I'm explaining your book to you, which is ridiculous, but but it seems to me, yes, you make a beautiful argument about, you know, the polycultural and, you know, let's call them affinity cultures for, you know, how it is. And for taiko, oh my God, I've thought a lot about these questions. Who gets to be part of a musical scene? On whose terms? Who gets to, you know, declare themselves part of the scene, you know? And, you know, these are the questions driving your book. They're very close to home for me. But the thing I loved that maybe didn't come out as clearly just now, which may be my own misreading of your book, my own longing writ large into your book, but you hit at the end of the book on this concept of pono, which has so many meanings, right? It's about goodness and morality and, you know, a lot of interrelated values around that. But you actually arrive at this ho'oponopono, which, and everything I know about this, I learned from you. It means something like to correct, to put something back to rights, as I understand it, to restore a sense of pono, something like that.
Yes.
That's the decolonial, isn't it? I mean, that's, you know, maybe it's similar to the concept of resurgence in indigenous critical theory. That's the part of the book that just floored me, I have to say. Yeah,
thanks. Yeah, that and the sense of restorative justice, right? Right, like, you know, South Africa famously after apartheid, right? That kind of move is what I was interested in, and sort of opening up that there is this process that Hawaiians have, right? For, I don't know if adjudicating is the right word, but, you know, for determining how social relations can be, right? I guess, you know, righteous, to use one kind of word, right? But that they would be, you know, I keep wanting to just say pono, but that's, you know, it's tautological. But yeah, that sense that Hawaiians already have this process for, you know, dealing with difference. I mean, that's the other thing, right? That I'm sort of struggled through too. Is like, you know, how how do we accept and know and recognize difference and yet not be in automatically into antagonistic relationships or oppositional relationships, right? Because Hawaiians, again, have shown us that there are ways, and they're not the only people, right? They're not the only people that have this idea of calabash aunts and uncles, right? There are a lot of communities, right, that have that kind of sensibility around belonging. But I just wanted to sort of extend it out, like, okay, this is not just cultural, this is political, right?
Okay.
This can be political, right? And for, you know, some activists it is, right? There's like the people like Pua Case and things up at Mauna Kea, right? They call themselves protectors and not protesters, right? Again, a kind of decolonial rethinking of what they're actually doing, right, on Mauna Kea. So that's all part of that, right? This kind of, again, as you say, this kind of decolonizing really requires a shifting. And part of the shift for me was, you know, thinking through these Hawaiian keywords, because they, you know, it comes out of an epistemology and ontology that deals with difference very differently. Right?
Wow. You sure did that. Yeah, that's the deep beauty of the book. And by the way, just to the audience, you probably didn't hear what we heard when we were getting ready for today's conversation. Our two ASL interpreters apparently are both originally from Hawaii, and you know, I would love to know what they're doing with some of the vocabulary right now. And I also noticed how they were enjoying the music during your presentation, Kevin, listening to Gabi Pahinui. Okay, I have to share with you a paragraph that I just really loved. May I share with you a paragraph that I loved? And because I know we're coming up against time, and then maybe you could share with us a paragraph or a sentence or whatever about which you're particularly, you know, something pleased, proud, whatever. But me first, it's on page 33. It's on page 33 for any of you who might happen to have. By the way, Kevin's book is on JSTOR. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. I mean, of course, we would like you to buy it, but but it is on JSTOR.
Reading is more important than buying.
You know, right? It's not as if the royalties really add up to very much. Yeah, page 33, the lower half. I love this because it is very much about sound, this passage, but I just love the writing here. So you start with, you know, grabbing onto Steve Fellzs, you know, now famous concept and word, acoustomology, right? Yeah. And you're treating it very much as, you know, as an emplaced and embodied, you know, idea. Yeah. So here's the part I loved. I want to think through this predicament of a traveling or dislocating Hawaiian acoustomology, its transformations, its circulatory pathways, as waves traveling from the center of the ocean, breaking into surf at different beachheads, as the sands as well as the tides, as the rocks churned into sand as well as the waters that circulate through cloud, ocean, and rain, as inseparable yet distinct elements in an ever-changing, individuated yet encompassing whole. In what ways, then, are these various interactive, if mediated, aspects of a Hawaiian guitar tradition articulations of a shared acoustomology, a shared sense of aloha, aina? How are they distinct? It is not simply a matter of aesthetics or measuring instrumental acuity among the participants. It is also a matter of positioning these guitarists within the histories to which they are born, the imagined intimacies to which they aspire, and the level of kuleana they take on. And kuleana is, of course, one of your key words for the book, meaning something like rights, privileges, responsibilities. I love that passage. That's only half the paragraph. There's that long sentence that just keeps going with all the oceanic and land-based metaphors, you know, and then you, boom, you pull it into acoustomology. It is so effective and so nicely written. And I'm sorry just to drop that on the ASL interpreters out of nowhere. Probably should have given it to them ahead of time.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, at one point, and an article that it did come later, I really been thinking through the idea of water. And that was another word, why or water, that I was thinking about using. And that actually is leading me to my next big project, which is going to take me out of probably music per se. I'm really thinking about global climate change and the ocean and our effect, and actually the way in which interspecies communication that occurs in the ocean has been affected by humans. So maybe noise pollution. I'm still very early thinking about this one, but I've been thinking about water and how it's important to Hawaii. And so, yeah, that was, I guess, the place where I kind of got to play with what I've been sort of starting to think through, which is the relationship to the ocean.
There are a few hints, I believe, that sea turtles make an appearance in the book. Yeah, I didn't realize it was your next project. Thanks for sharing that with us. Professor Wilson just suddenly appeared, which suggests that she wants to move things along, but Mabel, it's in your hands. I was hoping that Kevin might want to share another passage, but your call, Mabel.
Yeah, no, it's definitely up to you, Kevin, in terms of what you'd like to do. But there is a question in the Q&A, and I'm sure there are folks who would love to ask you a few questions about the book.
Yeah, let's see. I could just tell you about and it was a scene that I was really hesitant to put in the book, actually. And it's towards the end. I don't know if I can find it myself. But it's an ethnographic vignette, right? It's a moment where I'm with my family and I'm listening to one of my cousins play slack key, and he and I are the only ones. At the beginning of the book, I talk about one of my first trips as a kid to Hawaii, and how at the time there were these huge family luau's on the weekend, especially at my Uncle Sharky's house there in Kanaohi. And I loved them. I mean, there were these all weekend long affairs, basically, of music and food and, probably other stuff, but I was a kid. But there was definitely there was this music circle. And it was a very, it's a very loose thing. But, at some point, my grandmother and my aunties would start singing the old songs. Then my father and that generation would join in, and then they would sing, and it was a wide variety of music. It was old traditional stuff, ohana songs, hapahale stuff. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. And so towards the end of the book, when I sort of at a family gathering now, and I sort of miss, because that kind of family get together doesn't happen so much anymore. And so it was a very kind of, for me, I remember writing, it was a poignant moment when we were sitting there at this family thing, and he and I were realizing, because he's not in the greatest of health. And so we're realizing this might be one of the last times, right? And so that scene, actually, for me, it's meaningful for me personally.
It's a beautiful passage.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I appreciate, Kevin, about the book, I haven't read the whole thing, but I did read part of it because I realized I should know what we're going to talk about, is also the way in which you use kinship, right? And in kinship in a broader sense, and that the music is also around that. And just the way in which you talked about encountering these musicians in Japan, it seemed like they were taking you into both a community, but also in broader sense, a kind of family, and the ways in which they shared, and the role of kinship, I think, in the musical genre that you're talking about seems so vital.
Yes, definitely. And that's actually, one way the Japanese articulate their Hawaiianness, right? Or their sense of being at least, closely affiliated or belonging, is that sense of kinship and the sort of attention to notions of ohana, right, and family. And, in some ways, that group, I mean, people were amazed that I was getting invited to Japanese people's homes, which is kind of this thing. They don't even invite each other to each other's homes sometimes, right? People will know each other for decades and never gone to each other's home. But yeah, they were exceptionally, I mean, once Yamauchi and I really sort of started talking, and when, I mean, we're both vinyl LP collectors. And so speaking of kinship, we're, fellow collectors. And that was one way we really connected. That first trip was, I was like, I'm looking for music around here. He's like, oh, what are you going to do with the rest of the day? It's like, well, I'm going to go look for vinyl. But, if you have any recommendations for Hawaiian vinyl, I'd love to check it out, the Japanese stuff. And he's like, oh, you want to go record shopping? Okay, so next thing I know, he's another vinyl head, and we just, a lot of our time spent together. Actually, a lot of our conversations were over record bins.
Great. Well, should we take the first question? And also, if you have questions, it's easier for us to see them and everyone to see them in the Q&A. So please feel free to put them in the Q&A. And Deborah, please come back. No. I definitely join in the response and things to bring up. Your role is still vital. But I just was willing to read the Q&A. Some people don't like to be able to manage the Q&A, so I just came back for that. So George Muir, who you both might know, I don't know, says, I understand that the scope of your work here is focused on specific roots, personal experiences, and sites of research, and that there are many instances where Hawaiian guitar styles have been appropriated. But I did want to ask about any significant attached from a Hawaiian perspective to the enormous resonance of Hawaiian guitar style, tunings, etc., like Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, Vanuatu, etc., in forging a more Pacific, trans-Pacific frame of cultural circulation.
Yes, that would have been, someone needs to do that book. So George, if you want to do that. But yes, no, they definitely, in fact, I met a Samoan guitarist who played what he called Samoan slack key and Tongan slack key. I met a Tongan guitarist as well, played Tongan. So yes, there's definitely awareness of those styles among the Hawaiians, of course, and among, of course, the Tongans and the Samoans of the Hawaiian slack key tradition. And I just didn't have the time or the wherewithal to really dive into that part of the story, but that certainly would be a great project for somebody, because there are multiple guitar traditions, and I would even push it into, I mean, the guitar is huge in like Indonesia, right? And it's huge in, South Asia, in India as well. So, you could kind of extend right, the Indo-Pacific or something. You could extend that story, I think, too, into Southeast Asia, at least, as well. So there's a lot of guitar traditions around the Pacific that it would be a great story to investigate. Hope someone does it.
Deborah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that either, that question.
No, I'm gonna pass on that. And there is another question in the Q&A.
Yeah, and this one is from Killen Reese, who asks, have you traced the origins of the narrative that cites the Mexican vaqueros that arrived in Hawaii to train the Pañuelos as the inception of the Hawaiian slack key tradition?
Yes. I go through, there's a sort of well-known narrative, and I present that narrative where, the short version is Mexican vaqueros are hired by the Hawaiian elites to control the cattle. They're given a gift of cattle. Hawaiians had never dealt with cattle, so they really didn't know what to do with them. And they become these feral population, and they begin to destroy property and to some extent, threaten human life as well. And it becomes this huge problem that these roving, cattle herds are wreaking havoc in Hawaii. And so a Hawaiian elite is visiting in California, sees the rodeo or something, and he sees the vaqueros working, and he says, that's the answer to our cattle problem. We'll hire some of those vaqueros, they'll teach the Hawaiians how to, handle cattle, and we'll, and what happened was the Mexicans brought the guitars to Hawaii. And they had a tradition of sitting around the campfires in the evenings. The Hawaiians picked up on this. The Mexicans had a tradition of two guitarists performing. And so the Hawaiian guitarists, when the Mexican vaqueros leave, there were contract hires. They left their guitars, and the Hawaiians, on their own kind of figured out open tunings and sort of applied Hawaiian aesthetics to the guitar at that point. Right? And then you come through the slow. I kind of push against that a little bit. And I'm not the only one. I'm sort of drawing from George Kanahele, who's a Hawaiian historian at that time period, who also in the 70s was already kind of raising questions about that story. And I do raise, and it's very much a speculative gesture on my part. I haven't found any proof of any of this. But my speculation is that maybe the women on these plantations were the ones creating the music. And one, because women were the ones who were early, pre-Gabi Pahinui, there are these women like Auntie Alice Namakalua who played these older Paniolo style of Hawaiian slack key. And if you think about the 19th century, when this time period, when this music was emerging, that there was a tradition, right, of the piano in the parlor, right? But there was also a parallel parlor guitar tradition, right? So these smaller guitars, and women played them. There's actually, right now, there's, actually an African-American classical guitarist who plays beautiful parlor guitar, all this sort of older 19th century repertoire. So my speculation is that, the parlor guitar tradition might have had a presence in Hawaii as well, that along with those steel string, maybe the parlor guitar came over as well, or that idea that women creating music in the house, right, was so prevalent. So again, that's my speculation. There's, I didn't come across any documentation or anybody even willing to say, yeah, that sounds plausible. But to me, that seems much more plausible in many ways than having to create a repertoire and a style and aesthetic and everything after, working 10 hours in the saddle. I mean, it's possible, but you have women that are, what are they doing, besides all the domestic chores of the ranch, right? But there's an investment in femininity and music at the time, right? That becomes the piano and the parlor. And again, like I say, the parlor guitar. So that's just, again, purely speculative on my part, though. At some point, it'd be nice maybe to see if there's a way of investigating that a little bit more, but.
Okay, great. Kellen says thank you. So we have a couple of other questions. One from Noah Rosen, who says, hi, Kevin. In your book, you mention native Hawaiian musicians like Stephen Inglis, who didn't come to love or learn to play Hawaiian music until moving away, joining the diaspora. Can you speak more to this phenomenon of native Hawaiians musically reconstructing their sense of home or belonging by performing indigeneity, perhaps for the first time, only after relocating?
Yes. Yeah, Stephen kind of represents that, right? The person who kind of takes Hawaiian music for granted in Hawaii, leaves Hawaii, he comes to California briefly, and that's where he kind of rediscovers his love of Hawaiian music. And actually begins learning slack key because two Hawaiian guitarists, Cyril Pahinui, who's on the cover, and Dennis Kamahaki, come to Redwood City where he's living at the time and give a guitar workshop over the weekend and sort of reignite his love of Hawaiian music. So he is typical of that kind of story. The other part corollary to that is Dennis Kamakahi's conversation I had with him where he talks about going to the continental US and playing to groups of Hawaiian, as he put it, as Hawaiian kids, but there would be students from Hawaii, some of whom were Native Hawaiian, not all though. And he talks about coming to college. He was doing college tours, and he would play this music, and they would be crying and oh, we miss Hawaii. And he's like, well, do you guys play? Anybody play uke or play some of this music? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, all right, well, you got to learn. You better come home and learn, or learn somehow learn the music. And again, right there, he's the one he's talking with them. They're typically going, we didn't really even pay attention to Hawaiian music in Hawaii, right? We were listening to hip hop, but then suddenly in California or Michigan or wherever they end up, suddenly Hawaiian music becomes super important, right, to their sense of home and the sense of themselves. And I think that is something that doesn't happen just with Hawaiians, right? I think you see that in all kinds of communities, of taking something for granted because it's so much part of the air almost, right, in your home, that you don't realize, right, it's the kind of thing, you don't realize what you got till it's gone. And in that relocating, particularly Hawaiian music that isn't really right, isn't really in like the airwaves. I don't know what is in the airwaves anymore, but it's right, it's not part of the larger continental US culture unless you specifically dive into it, right? And so when people from any community, when they're like that and they come to this country, and especially the continental part of this country, and their culture isn't part of the sort of social fabric, right, the everyday, that becomes this very special ground for them. And they that's when they seek it out, because they realize, ooh, maybe I don't really know this music. I thought I did, right? Or gee, I thought I knew hula, but I really don't. Right? And in terms of Hawaiian music and Hawaiian culture in general, I mean, that's another kind of tagline I have to the book, is a lot of people really like Hawaiian culture, right, that aren't Hawaiian, and learn. I mean, every single one of the people in Japan that was connected to that Hawaiian music scene, they all know Hawaiian. I don't even know if that's true in Hawaii, and it's certainly not true in California. Right? So there is that, right? So that kind of moving away and realizing, wow, my connection to that place was much more tenuous than I thought, right? And so one way of reconnecting is, okay, I'm going to learn the music, right? Even if I'm not there. That's going to reconnect me. So hopefully that answered.
Great, thank you. And we have one more question from Rick Tremilos, who asks, only if no one's asking, since I've already had quality time with both of them. So you must both know this person. In your interest in decolonizing music scholarship, have you drawn upon Pacific Islander scholars such as Hau'ofa, Tiawa, Went, etc., as well as Kanaka Maoli, Osorio, Tras, Noi Silva. And any thoughts on an emerging alternative epistemology? Small
Uh,
question at the end.
yes. Thanks for that, Rick. It's a great question. Yes, I draw on Halfa's. I mean, that whole idea that the Pacific connects the islands, the waters connect the islands rather than separate them, right? That's Halfa. His Sea of Islands essay, right, where he famously kind of delineates his idea around that connectivity along the Pacific or the Oceania, which he preferred. Yes, and Teresa was one of the things I really used her thinking that really resonated with me was the idea that just because you do a sort of a decolonial project, we also learn so much from the non-Indigenous as well, right? Our non-Indigenous teachers, right? So she's mindful that, yes, I'm going to count as my ancestors people like Foucault. I'm going to count among my ancestors, right? Other people that shape your thinking, right? And so yes, that in terms of an alternative epistemology, I think they, for me, that sort of connectivity to the rest of the world, to the other broader Oceania that they both sort of address. And Osorio and Trask and Silva, definitely all people I draw from, admire, and in particular Osorio's notion of the dismembering of the lahui, and I talk about music as perhaps one of the sort of prosthetics for sort of the re-energizing of the lahui. And of course, Trask is super important to anybody who wants to think seriously about Hawaiian sovereignty and gender and right, all of the sort of complicated ways she put together a project of Hawaiian sovereignty. And of course, Noi Silva's work where she uncovers the long history of Hawaiian resistance, right, to, in particular, the US-American illegal overthrow by the US government in 1893, right? So they all are very important for me in thinking through this project. And as an emerging alternative epistemology, yes, I think it's, in a constant kind of emergence. But, the notion of aloha aina that, George Helm, right, really promoted in the 70s, among other people, right? I think that is all, and the looking at indigenous populations across the planet are part of this emerging alternative epistemology. And right, I mean, global climate change, sort of the death throes of late capitalism, right? All of those are providing the space for these alternative epistemologies to emerge or re-emerge, right, out of indigenous roots. So yes, hopefully it can be part of that.
Great. Anything you want to still ask Deborah, or before we wrap everything up?
No, that was a really nice set of questions. So thank you to the audience. And today is all about Kevin's book. So I'm really glad we had the chance to hear from you, Kevin, about how you think about your book and how it came to be and where it might go.
Well,
congratulations.
Well, thank you so much again for your generosity over the years and then today. Just thank you so much.
Yeah,
Always
and I want to thank you both, Kevin, certainly for the book, and also Deborah for joining us today. It's been a really illuminating conversation. And I think, certainly I and the audience really learned a really great deal. And I think it's just an interesting model of colonizing scholarship, and really important to consider, I think, moving forward. And also, Kevin, I think the next book sounds amazing. So, hopefully it'll begin to coalesce, and, we'd love to hear more about that. So I also want to thank our co-sponsors of this evening's events, which I didn't say earlier, the Center for Ethnicity and Race and the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society here at Columbia University. And as always, a special thanks to our dedicated colleagues, Sean Mendoza and Sharon Harris, and also to Kobe King, who are essential to bringing tonight's events to you. And a special thank you to our ASL interpreters, Jennifer Blake and Pam Mosquito. So you've been seeing in the chat announcements for our next series of events. We have Professor Reagan Gillum of USC in anthropology in conversation about her new book, Visualizing Black Lives, Ownership and Control in Afro-Brazilian Media, with our colleague Raquel Gates, and that is next Monday. Also coming up on April 14th is a book talk that features Elizabeth Alexander discussing her new book, The Trayvon Generation, with our colleague Farah Griffin. So that's exciting. So please check for registration information on these events and other upcoming programs on our website, afamstudies, all one word, .columbia.edu. And so thank you for coming today and for your insightful questions. So please take care.